George.
What?
George.
Drop, you're lying. You're lying, bro. You're cap. Bro, you're cap. Oh my god, he did!
Heavy is the Crown. George R. R. Martin on His Triumphs and Torments, published by The Hollywood Reporter in January 2026, did some proverbial internet breaking. I rarely feel the need to comment on recent events, but now's as good of an opportunity to act out of character and hit the bullseye within the algorithm. It also means I can post something in between these long-ass videos that I'm planning in between my depressive episodes. This is going to be different from my usual videos, less coherent and tight, more casual. I want to share my thoughts on this interview and, more importantly, the reactions to it. I encourage everyone to read this article in full. I promise you won't regret it. I will only be showing short excerpts. Let's go. Before we start, remember that if you like my videos, like, subscribe and share so that more people can see it. Make sure to click the notification button so that you never miss a new video. Also, you can listen to this on Spotify if you prefer. Check the link in the description. I am also now live streaming here on YouTube every Sunday 8 PM Central European Time, which is around noon in the American time zone, so if you want to play games with me or say hi, be sure to come by. Disclaimer. All posts, tweets, and other reactions presented in this video were found by me personally or were sent to me by others. I blur the OPs as I don't want people to go and harass anyone on my behalf, and I do not have a problem with people expressing opinions different from mine. Usually. My responses to these people are not attacks on these people, they exist solely to illustrate my points, which are made in response to broader beliefs held by the fandom. Martin long has resisted sequels to Thrones because the ending of his Ice and Fire books is not going to align with the show, and he wants to avoid further canonizing Thrones' controversial ending, even though he hasn't written his own yet. The book's ending is going to be significantly different, Martin says. Some characters who are alive in my book are going to be dead in the show, and vice versa. The surprise to this passage is strange, because my reaction was, yeah, of course, I knew this since 2022 and possibly even earlier. George had expressed similar sentiments on numerous occasions. At least at the time of the airing of Season 8, we were still in the dark, as George's post regarding the ending was very vague. How will it end? I hear people asking. The same ending as the show? Different? Well, yes, and no, and yes, and no, and yes, and no, and yes. I am working in a very different medium than David and Dan, never forget. They had 6 hours for this final season. I expect these last 2 books of mine will fill 3,000 manuscript pages between them before I'm done. And if more pages and chapters and scenes are needed, I will add them. And of course the butterfly effect will be at work as well. Those of you who follow this Not a Blog will know that I've been talking about this since Season 1. There are characters who never made it onto the screen at all, and others who died in the show but still live in the books. Book or show, which will be the real ending? It's a silly question. How many children did Scarlett O'Hara have? How about this? I will write it. You read it, then everyone can make up their own mind and argue about it on the internet. I have compiled more of the statements George made over the years in a video posted in April of 2024, but I will reiterate them here once more. May 2016, long before Season 8. He wasn't exactly dissing the show, but he didn't have anything good to say about it. One guy asked if Season 6 would spoil the books for him. Something like, don't think what happens in the show will happen in the books, the show is completely different. The books will be nothing like that. You could really feel the dislike he had for it. September 2019, several months after the ending. It can be traumatic because sometimes their creative vision and your creative vision don't match, and you get the famous creative differences thing. That leads to a lot of conflict. He also said that the show's divisive final series was not completely faithful to what he had mapped out, joking, otherwise it would have to run another 5 seasons. July of 2022. What I have noticed more and more of late, however, is my gardening is taking me further away from the television series. Yes, some of the things you saw on HBO in Game of Thrones, you will also see in The Winds of Winter, though maybe not in quite the same ways. But much of the rest will be quite different. And really, when you think about it, this was inevitable. The novels are much bigger and much more complex than the series. Certain things that happened on HBO will not happen in the books, and vice versa. I have viewpoint characters in the books never seen on the show. Victorian Greyjoy, Arya Martell, Arya Hota, John Connington, Aeron Damphair. They will all have chapters, and the things they do and say will impact the story and the major characters who were on the show. August 2022. By season 5 and 6, and certainly 7 and 8, I was pretty much out of the loop, he revealed. Asked why he became estranged from the show, he simply replied, I don't know, you have to ask Dan and David. And there's one more I found just today in the transcript of the History of Westeros podcast, August 2022. I had a lot of input in the beginning of Game of Thrones, partly because I had these books out there. But at a certain point, as the show went on, I found I had less and less influence until by the end, I really didn't even know what was going on. Some of the things I watched like everybody else and, oh, okay. Right after this, he says that he has a great relationship with Condal and Sapochnik. Subtle foreshadowing. About that later. In Fire Cannot Kill a Dragon, coincidentally written by the same dude who wrote this internet-breaking article, George had this to say. Right over there, he said, was where he'd sat with David Benioff, Dan Weiss and Brian Cogman back in 2013 and revealed his long-held secret ending for A Song of Ice and Fire. By that time, it was clear to Martin that the show would have major divergences from his novels. During the pilot reshoot, I visited the set on the Isle of Malta and met some of the new actors, Martin recalled. There was some crisis that occurred. The director called David and Dan over, and they were having some discussion about 10 feet away about how to handle it. And that was when I realized my baby wasn't entirely my baby anymore, because I wasn't part of that discussion. The director was talking to Dan and Dave. Nobody was saying, George, come over and tell us your opinion. I didn't throw a tantrum or anything, Martin added calmly. I just came to the realization. I gave my baby up for adoption, and now there is a parent-teacher conference, and I'm not invited. And now, for anyone unconvinced, this The Hollywood Reporter article should be the final nail in the coffin. But you would have known this before, if you just listened to George. Except you don't listen to George. Some people still don't listen to him, even after that article, and would take the word of anyone ahead of him. You would take the word of D&D ahead of him. You would take the word of Condal ahead of him. You would take the word of his friend and co-writer ahead of him. You would take the words of A Song of Ice and Fire YouTubers, TikTokers or podcasters ahead of him. What George says here plainly doesn't matter because it doesn't match what you actually want him to say. And you want him to say, my ending will be the same as the show, only I will write it in a way that gives you closure. As soon as that article came out, I knew what reactions there would be to it. Here's proof from the group chat I'm in about an hour after that article dropped. A substantial portion of the reactions was precisely, yeah, that makes sense. Winds takes so long because this was his ending, but he changed his mind seeing the backlash and is now rewriting it. First of all, I don't know George, and neither do you for the matter, but from how I've seen him operate, he is not the one to crack under pressure. He is stubborn. If this was his ending, he would have written it for better or worse. This sentiment exists because this is what some people want to believe because they liked that ending. They hated the execution and the fact that the execution made it unsalvageable and impossible to be taken seriously, which is why they hope that George will salvage that ending by writing it well. Honestly, if D&D put 10% more effort into writing it, people would eat this up. But how many more confirmations do you need that it was never his and that it stopped being his long before season 8? The first instance of him saying that the show is nothing like the books was from August 2016, when season 6 was airing. I was going to kill more people, he muses. Not the ones they killed in the show. They made it more of a happy ending. This may instinctually surprise some people because George implied that season 8 was more of a happy ending. Of course, not fully happy, but happier than the one he's planned. Of course, this seems absurd because to us, this ending was abysmal, but if you look at the ending from the point of view of the characters, everyone but Daenerys got what they wanted, or at least was somewhat at peace. Sansa was queen, Jon went beyond the wall to have adventures, Arya was going to explore the world, Bran was king, Tyrion was Hand and Lord of Casterly Rock, Bronn had Highgarden, even Cersei and Jaime got to die in each other's arms. Daenerys lost everything she had in the span of 2 episodes, went insane, burned down a city, was murdered in a moment of intimacy, and everyone who stayed loyal to her was removed from Westeros without delivering any consequences for Jon or Tyrion who orchestrated her murder. The issue is again, people like that ending, not the execution. And this is especially visible in the persisting insistence that Daenerys' ending is also her book ending. But curiously, nothing about how Jaime will disavow the citizens of King's Landing and run back to Cersei, nothing about Bronn being Lord of Highgarden, nothing about Euron being a joke. They want Daenerys to be mad, but are not satisfied with the execution, hence they cling to that George will write it super well, just wait, or the milder, he changed his mind due to the backlash. One of my predictions is that once, or if, I don't rule anything out, Denis' trajectory isn't anywhere close to the show, people will say that George changed the ending because he was scared of toxic Daenerys fans. And do I even have to mention this part about the characters that died in the show but live in the books and how this probably includes Daenerys? In the time frame between the release of Dance and now, we had an entire show and more than a decade with no books from the main saga. And we entered zoohouses. We walk in circles, speculate, get no confirmation, speculate some more until we turn into Aerys Targaryen. As such, people basically wrote their own version of wins. There are predictions that are widely accepted that I disagree with, and this article confirmed my instincts. George planned to kill off Sansa, one of the characters that most of the fandom believed to be safe. And I'm not sure if he actually changed his mind on this or not, it's impossible to say from the way this is worded. What matters here is not Sansa herself, it's what we took for granted for all these years and how that one sentence just unraveled it. How many of our assumptions about what must happen are just wrong? I think many, if not most. The version of Wins that was written by the fandom is probably very far off. Many of those Wins predictions were written around the show, which was always an unreliable framework, and now it's confirmed to be even more unreliable. At least to those who listen to George, that is. I think Wins will come out sooner rather than later, and I think a lot of those predictions taken for granted will be very quickly jousted, which will fuel the he changed his ending due to the show's backlash. Me personally, I will not be mad if my predictions are off, since I always make them with a grain of salt and don't really like to speculate, but I will be happy at the fallout. It's gonna be generational, I can't wait. So my only comment for now is everyone chill. I understand the compulsion to predict and theorize, but don't take anything for granted, especially not the shit that the YouTubers or Redditors tell you is 100% confirmed. But also don't be a contrarian. Ideally, take your insights from as many conflicting sources as possible, make up your own mind, but never accept totalities. Now, to the part of the article that also isn't anything new, but it's still worth discussing. I asked Martin carefully. I know you can't say much about this, but I was wondering how your relationship with Dragon showrunner Ryan Condal got so rocky. It's worse than rocky, Martin says, looking miserable. It's abysmal. Without getting into spoilers, Martin's gripes about Dragon stem from disputes over changes to his book's characters that impact key plot points. I hired Ryan, Martin says. I thought Ryan and I were partners. All through the first season. I would read early drafts of the scripts. I would give notes. He would change some things. It was working really well, I thought. Then we got into season 2 and he basically stopped listening to me, Martin says. I would give notes and nothing would happen. Sometimes he would explain why he wasn't doing it. Other times he would tell me, oh okay, yeah, I'll think about that. And I began to get more and more annoyed. Finally, it got to the point where I was told by HBO that I should submit all my notes to them and they would give Ryan our combined notes. One night in 2024, while the second season was airing, Martin wrote a blog post, Beware the Butterflies, which publicly revealed some of his gripes. When he woke the next morning, it was as if Martin had unleashed his own Red Wedding. An upset HBO exec had called Martin's manager, who phoned Martin's assistant, who took down the post, but not before entertainment sites, including THR, picked up Martin's comments. I would have put it back up, but then I would have looked like an idiot, he says. And 80% of it was praise, but that's not what people focused on. For some context for those in the dark. In September 2024, George made a blog post criticizing House of the Dragon. It was quickly deleted, but nothing on the internet disappears. Hence it was quickly archived and can still be read if you know where to look. Martin's main point of contention is how the show handled the adaptation of Blood and Cheese. This is also something I predicted they will butcher, but enough with the quoting. George's main issue was the exclusion of Maelor from the scene, which cheapened the Sophie's Choice aspect of the story, Helena offering a necklace as opposed to her own life, as well as how Maelor's absence will impact the story further down the line. What matters is that George warned Condal against this. When Ryan Condal first told me what he meant to do, ages ago, back in 2022 maybe, I argued against it, for all these reasons. I did not argue long or with much heat, however. The change weakened the sequence, I felt, but only a bit, and Ryan had what seemed to be practical reasons for it. They did not want to deal with casting another child, especially a 2-year-old toddler. Kids that young will inevitably slow down production, and there would be budget implications. Budget was already an issue on House of the Dragon. It made sense to save money wherever we could. Moreover, Ryan assured me that we were not losing Prince Maelor, simply postponing him. Sometime between the initial decision to remove Maelor, a big change was made. The prince's birth was no longer just going to be pushed back to season 3. He was never going to be born at all. The younger son of Aegon and Helena would never appear. Maelor is a 2-year-old toddler in Fire and Blood, but like our butterfly, he has an impact on the story, all out of proportion to his size. The readers among you may recall that when it appears that Rhaenyra and her blacks are about to capture King's Landing, Queen Alicent becomes concerned for the safety of Helena's remaining children and takes steps to save them by smuggling them out of the city. I have no idea what Ryan has planned, if indeed he has planned anything, but given Maelor's absence from episode 2, the simplest way to proceed would be just to drop him entirely, lose the bit where Alicent tries to send the kids to safety, drop Rickard Thorne or send him with Willis Fell so Jaehaera has 2 guards. From what I know, that seems to be what Ryan is doing here. It's simplest, yes, and may make sense in terms of budgets and shooting schedules, but simpler is not better. The butterflies are not done with us yet, however. In the book, when word of Prince Maelor's death and the grisly manner of his passing reaches the Red Keep, that proves to be the thing that drives Queen Helena to suicide. She could barely stand to look at Maelor, knowing that she chose him to die in the Sophie's Choice scene. And now he is dead in truth, her words having come true. The grief and guilt are too much for her to bear. In Lyon's outline for season 3, Helena still kills herself, for no particular reason. There is no fresh horror, no triggering event to overwhelm the fragile young queen. So what happened was this. Ryan Condal and George started off on good terms. Ryan listened to George, but at some point he stopped taking his insights into consideration. Some straw broke the camel's back, and now the relationship is abysmal. Quite bafflingly, some people take Ryan Condal's side in this beef, insisting that George is unreasonable and that House of the Dragon is still better than Fire and Blood. In fact, when the initial post landed on Not a Blog, quite a lot of bigger names in the fandom called George unprofessional, which is just, let's say, unprincipled. I see why it happened. I'm not naming names, but these people got access to early screenings and were invited to premieres. I'm sure money was involved too. I can respect chasing the bag, but to make a grift out of A Song of Ice and Fire and then throw the author under the bus for the sake of Ryan Condal? When this entire controversy was unraveling, I went on my TikTok to comment on it, and I will briefly summarize what I said back then. George was very diplomatic in that post. Authors who had their books butchered in adaptations have been much sharper in their criticism before, and it's their right. George doesn't owe Condal shit. In fact, he should have whooped him harder. And now I will reiterate what I've been saying ever since 2022. No, House of the Dragon is not an improvement of Fire and Blood, and this is an opinion you can hold even if you're not a toxic book purist like myself. I disliked season 1 of House of the Dragon, though I will admit that some of it was entertaining and I liked some changes, but in my humble opinion it didn't deserve the praise it received. In fact, in my perception, this praise was influenced not by the quality of the writing, but by other factors. House of the Dragon Season 1 suffers from Game of Thrones Season 5 to 7 syndrome. People started noticing the flaws only in retrospect and with the benefit of hindsight. Look at these YouTube videos by Supercut Delight. Why Season 5 of Game of Thrones is so mediocre. GOT Season 6 being devoid of logic. Why Season 7 of Game of Thrones was so bad. If you express those opinions as the show was airing, as my humble 17-year-old self was doing, you would be eaten alive. But now, with the benefit of hindsight, everyone sees the flaws they were previously ignoring. All the videos that I mentioned have a lot of views, comments that agree with the premise, and crucially, were posted after Season 8 finale. That is because spectacle, acting, and the love for the story can often give us blind spots and make us overlook certain issues. Much the same thing happened with Arcane Season 2. The visuals were so stunning that many people overlooked the obvious writing flaws. Right after it aired, it was blasphemy to say anything bad about it, but now a year later the charm has worn off and people are slowly waking up. I think people were so traumatized by the finale of Game of Thrones that they were desperate for a redemption, and House of the Dragon seemingly delivered that, which made people ignore issues in the story that I already know will pile up in the future seasons and implode. I did not expect it to happen as early as Season 2, but that was my belief and I was right. People looked past the exhausting time skips, huge events that don't matter in the grand scheme of things, like Rhaenys and the Dragon Pit scene that never results in anything, and later Condal said that Meleys is a beloved dragon. Okay? The fact that nobody knows how old everyone is supposed to be because the timelines were mixed, and the inconsistent characterizations. Another aspect was that Fire and Blood was always disadvantaged against any visual medium. Not only because it was a book, but it was a book drastically different from the main series or Dunk and Egg novellas. We didn't have insight into the characters' heads, they were historical figures shrouded by time and the historians who interpreted and reimagined them. As such, it really is not an achievement for Condal to flesh them out. Most of the work is done for him by the nature of TV as a medium. The moment these characters actually start talking, living, and reading, 80% of his work is done. The remaining 20% will inevitably be overshadowed because Condal did not have to do anything interesting with these characters for people to eat it up. People praise him for the choice to make rhaenyra and Alicent childhood best friends, but I always thought that this choice and some of other choices are always the lowest possible denominator. In one quick stroke, he made Alicent more sympathetic by aging her down. He already introduced the two as childhood best friends, so he did not have to properly develop their bond. And most crucially, he did not have to grapple with complicated questions their book dynamic would have posed if translated on screen. He also bended the surrounding world and the narrative for this to work. He removed Rhaenyra's bond with Laena, which would have immediately overshadowed the one with Alicent, and made it seem like Alicent and Rhaenyra are the only teen girls at court, which is absurd. It also cannot be understated that, due to the anti-Targaryen contrarianism going on in the fandom, fans were happy about the nuancing of the Greens, who in the books are clear and unabashed villains. And because people will camp in any team that causes harm to the Targaryens, they approve of this change and were grateful to Condal for making it. There is a reason why prior to the show barely anyone was Team Green. Don't fall for the revisionism. The consensus was always the blacks were not saints, but nobody in their right mind would be Team Green. In general, comparing book and show versions of the characters is like apples and oranges, but we can analyze how they function within their respective stories as tools serving the narrative. And here cracks appear. Book characters in Fire and Blood have clear motivations. Those sometimes shift in time, but it happens as a result of external circumstances. Daemon chasing the crown becomes Daemon accepting he will never be king and instead supporting Rhaenyra's claim. They make choices consistent with what was established about them as characters, their personalities, and motivations. House of the Dragon, however, has a pattern of character inconsistency that is absent from Fire and Blood. This is often misattributed to character complexity or explained away by headcanons. But as things stand, these characters change their motivations within days for no discernible reason. Alicent Hightower is by far the most egregious example of that. In the books, Alicent has a goal and is relentless in pursuing it. I want my son on the throne at Rhaenyra's expense, and I will stop at nothing to see it happen. There are no cracks in this at any point in the story, and Alicent's regret happens after she loses her entire family as a result of her ambitions. Now let's show Alicent's trajectory. She is Rhaenyra's bestie. Her father forces her to marry Rhaenyra's father, which strains their relationship. There are some attempts at reconciliation. Otto poisons those attempts by pointing out that Alicent's son will be a threat to Rhaenyra. Alicent learns that Rhaenyra slept with Criston Cole. Alicent wears the green dress and symbolically declares war on Rhaenyra. Alicent becomes a menace, undermines Rhaenyra, humiliates her, hates her sons, poisons her sons against Rhaenyra's sons. Aegon gets the memo. You are the challenge simply by living and breathing. Alicent rules King's Landing because Viserys is sick. Alicent plots with Daemon to undermine Viserys' legitimacy and by extension, Rhaenyra's. Alicent suffers a humiliating political loss when Viserys enters the throne room. And here, Alicent completely glitches as a character. She just accepts that with no struggle. Why do you give up so easily? And more importantly, why are you in the Green Council acting outraged that Rhaenyra is about to be usurped? Oh, that's because she's a woman who was excluded from plans by men. Even if she was excluded, she was running King's Landing in Viserys' absence. She was poisoning Aegon's mind. She was undermining Rhaenyra. Whether she was involved in the secret scheming is irrelevant, because she was scheming herself at that point. And here these schemes should overlap. Alicent suddenly backing away is not consistent with her previous characterization. This is not complex character writing. Alicent isn't a real person who is contradictory. Alicent is a tool of the narrative. She shouldn't change her motivation so drastically within such a short span of time, not without some astronomical catalyst. And the prophecy is not that. She accepts Rhaenyra's inheritance before she learns of the prophecy. She spent a decade undermining Rhaenyra's inheritance. She wouldn't change her mind in a single day because Viserys showed up in the throne room. That's why she's inconsistent in a way her book self isn't. An inconsistent character is a badly written character, and your headcanons are headcanons, nothing more. I suspected during the airing of Season 1 that those inconsistencies will continue to pile up like that, and I was right. The best example is Daemon's season-long ayahuasca trip in Harrenhal. Again, let's compare these two characters in their respective mediums. Book Daemon. Younger brother with a second son complex, clings to the idea of kinghood, wants to be Viserys' heir and rages when Rhaenyra is named above him, fucks off to the Stepstones and names himself King of the Narrow Sea, tries to court Rhaenyra to rule through her, fails, is exiled, marries Laena, becomes a father, settles down, and realizes he won't ever be king. Backs Rhaenyra once she's usurped and dies for her and her claim. Consistent character trajectory. Show Daemon. Younger brother with a second son complex. Clings to the idea of kinghood. Wants to be Viserys' heir and rages when Rhaenyra is named above him. Fucks off to the Stepstones and names himself King of the Narrow Sea. Tries to court Rhaenyra to rule through her. Fails, is exiled. Marries Laena, becomes a father, settles down somewhat reluctantly, runs to Rhaenyra when Laena's corpse isn't even cold, seemingly accepts that he won't ever be king, symbolically presented by him helping Viserys climb the throne and placing the crown on his head. Rages when Rhaenyra is usurped and prepares to strike, crowns Rhaenyra and accepts himself as subordinate to her, and then glitches like Alicent. Everything up to this point made sense, but then Daemon goes to Harrenhal and suddenly decides to pursue the crown for himself. After he accepted Viserys' authority, after he crowned Rhaenyra himself, after giving up something he pursued his entire life because his priorities shifted. In the book, by the time the dance starts, Daemon's character development is complete. In the show, he goes back to square one for no reason other than character inconsistency and Condal's hate boner for him. And they didn't even do anything interesting with it. Just a series of repetitive and forgettable visions. And what sets Daemon back on track is not the memory of Viserys, not his care for Rhaenyra, not his recognition that yes, I am always going to be the second son and I must do the best with it. It's him seeing the White Walkers. Again, your headcanons don't matter, nor does your hate boner for Daemon. These do not logically follow from the previously established character trajectory. This is what I mean when I say that the alarm bells should have been going already in Season 1. Season 2 was just a continuation of this contradictory character writing. Nobody was there to give Condal a reality check. I could, but I don't think he watches YouTube video essays. So when the praise flew his way, he inevitably convinced himself that he is a better writer than George R.R. Martin, even when 80% of it was baked in the nature of the medium, so he had nothing to do with it, and that remaining 20% left a lot to be desired. Of course he started ignoring George's concern. He started thinking he's better. There was this review of House of the Dragon Season 1 that I read a long time ago that nailed my issues perfectly, but I will read just one relevant excerpt. Honestly, I never heard a fiction writer say that, as a literary artist, their focus is on accidents and how people respond to them. The reason for this, I imagine, is that, by definition, accidents do not in themselves reveal character. Having a character be defined by his or her response to events they did not intend makes the character wholly reactive and therefore, in one sense at least, flat. Yet this is what Condal insists upon, saying to Variety, this is Aemon's first act as a dragon rider and a warrior, and it's gone very wrong. By accident. Now what happens as a result? And how does he respond? Those are the questions I'm interested in as a dramaticist. Here's the issue laid clearly. Condal uses misunderstandings and accidents in place of genuine conflict. He either can't write conflict or is scared to make characters commit to that conflict. This is why those inconsistencies in characterization arise. Conflict is the core of every story ever written. From the Epic of Gilgamesh to your average fanfic on AO3. Who are you as a writer if you can't write something as fundamental to storytelling as compelling conflict? So, in essence, people ignore those issues because 1. Ooga booga cool dragon battles, and I get it, I love ooga booga cool dragon battles too. 2. They fill the holes with their own explanations and headcanons. 3. Everyone desperately wanted the legacy of Game of Thrones to be redeemed, which is why they initially ignored these problems until they blew in everyone's faces and we couldn't ignore them anymore. In my opinion, the show is still better is cope, and it's not a coincidence that this sentiment mostly comes from shippers. All I'm going to say is, Condal is not Vince Gilligan. He is not a good enough writer to go so hard for, and the continued rewards he got for his mediocrity are the reason for his fallout with George. And George was already more charitable than I was, because he liked Season 1. You're entitled to any opinion you want, I don't care. My opinion is that House of the Dragon is not a good adaptation and is lacking as a standalone story. I dislike rewarding mediocrity, and the implication that Condal and Martin are on the same level as writers, let alone Condal being better than George, is just something I can't let slide. Condal doesn't even deserve praise for the ships. Rhaenyra was allegedly the idea of Sapochnik's wife. Sarah Hess, Emma Darcy, and Sonoya Mizuno were the ones who explicitly made Rhaenyra queer, but they won't get their flowers because Rhaenyra kissed the wrong woman. The circle closes, mediocrity rewarded. And when it blows up in your face even harder in Season 3, don't say I didn't warn you. I think that several years down the line, people may look back at Season 1 the way they did Season 5 to 7 of Game of Thrones. Oh, it was bad. How did I not see it? Now, I may be wrong, but hey, let me brag for a second, because I predicted the downfall of House of the Dragon in 2022, I predicted they will fumble Blood and Cheese, I even predicted the responses to that fuck-ass interview. I also give banger tarot readings, 100% customer satisfaction. It's good to see that George is in good health, that he is as sharp as ever, that he seems to be somewhat at peace, especially compared to the earlier interviews with his fears over legacy. There was this really depressing part about him having some sort of an ice and fire fatigue, but it's psychologically understandable and I think ultimately different from Herbert's fatigue over Dune. I think George still loves the story, but has an obligation and that creates resentment. Normal. As for the spin-offs, I don't care, but they're going to do an Arya spin-off probably, and it will be set in between seasons in Bravos. But as things stand, the overall impression I got from this article is positive. Maybe I'm just delusional, but I always had hope in George, and while I do give him shit every 2 business days, ultimately I will always take his side. Which can be said about many diehard A Song of Ice and Fire fans. This is different from my usual videos. As I said, I rarely feel the need to comment on some recent events in the video format. If I do, I mostly do it on TikTok, which you can follow, link in the description. This was just my stream of consciousness that I thought could result in something productive for once, a breather between those super long videos I've been writing for months now, so I hope you enjoyed it. In any case, thanks for watching, like, subscribe and share, make sure to click the notification button. I will see you on Saturday's stream or in the next video. And for now, Phoenix rises from the ashes and I shall stand on top.